Long before he became the most lethal sniper in American military history, Chris Kyle was just a Texas boy with dirt under his fingernails and dreams as wide as the Lone Star sky. Born in Odessa in 1974, Kyle's childhood wasn't marked for military greatness. His father, a deacon and a man of few words, taught him to hunt before he could properly tie his shoes. By 8, young Chris could track a deer through the underbrush and take it down with a single, clean shot. My daddy always said, if you're going to shoot something, you make damn sure it's a clean kill, Kyle would later tell his SEAL teammates during long nights on watch. Anything else is just cruelty. The Kyle household ran on simple rules. You work hard, you tell the truth, you protect the weak, and you never, ever give up. These weren't just platitudes hanging on the wall. They were expectations woven into the fabric of daily life. When 12-year-old Chris found a group of boys tormenting a stray dog behind the local grocery store, he didn't hesitate. The resulting scuffle left him with a black eye and the boys with a newfound respect for consequences. The dog, a scraggly mutt he named Bullet, slept at the foot of his bed for the next 7 years. I wasn't trying to be a hero, he'd say years later, the desert sand of Ramadi crunching under his boots. I just couldn't stand by and watch something that wasn't right. Those who knew him then would never have predicted his future. Chris Kyle, the legend, began as Chris Kyle, the ordinary boy who couldn't abide injustice. It was this simple moral compass that would eventually guide him through the chaos of war. September 11th, 2001, changed everything for Kyle, as it did for so many Americans. He was working as a ranch hand, breaking horses and mending fences when the towers fell. That night, he sat silent on his porch, a beer warming in his hand as he stared at stars that suddenly seemed less bright. I always thought I'd serve eventually, he confided to his father that night. But now it feels like I don't have a choice anymore. 2 days later, he walked into a Navy recruitment office. The recruiter, noting Kyle's hunting background and steady demeanor, suggested he consider the SEALs. Kyle had heard of them. Everyone had. But the idea that he could be one seemed as distant as those Texas stars. SEAL training broke men by design. Of the 180 who started with Kyle, only 48 would finish. The instructors pushed them beyond what they thought possible, then demanded more. During Hell Week, after 5 days without sleep, standing in the freezing Pacific surf, Kyle had a moment of perfect clarity. I realize pain is just information, he later wrote in his journal. You can acknowledge it without letting it control you. When other men quit, ringing the bell that signified surrender, Kyle thought of his father's quiet strength, of his mother's resilience through her battle with cancer. He thought of the American flag that hung on their porch every day, not just on holidays. And he endured. His SEAL instructors noted his exceptional marksmanship early on. While other trainees struggled with long-distance shots, Kyle seemed to have an intuitive understanding of wind, distance, and trajectory. What others calculated, he felt. It's like the bullet and I have an understanding, he once tried to explain to a teammate who asked about his technique. I know where it needs to go, and it trusts me to send it there. Kyle's first deployment to Iraq came in 2003 during the initial invasion. Assigned to protect Marine units as they moved through hostile territory, he quickly established himself as someone the ground troops wanted watching over them. His first confirmed kill came 3 weeks into deployment. An insurgent with an RPG was preparing to fire a Marine convoy. Kyle, positioned on a rooftop 400 yards away, took the shot. Through his scope, he watched the man crumple, the weapon falling harmlessly aside. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Took a life today to save others. God, I hope I did right." The entry revealed something the movies never captured, the weight of responsibility that came with his skill. Each time Kyle pulled the trigger, he carried the burden of that decision, even when he knew it was necessary. As his reputation grew among both American forces and insurgents, Kyle remained grounded by daily calls home when possible. His wife Taya became his anchor to the world outside war, though the distance between their experiences grew with each deployment. "How was your day?" she would ask. "Fine," he would answer, unable to find words to bridge the gulf between her world of grocery stores and pediatrician visits and his world of dust and blood and split-second decisions. During his second tour, Kyle began to understand that the hardest part of war wasn't the physical danger, but maintaining your humanity when surrounded by inhumanity. He started a ritual of saying the names of the Marines he protected each night before sleep, reminding himself why he was there. Johnson, Martinez, Williams, Cooper. The list grew longer with each deployment, but he never stopped the practice. By his third deployment, Kyle had earned the nickname Legend among Marines and fellow SEALs. Insurgents placed a bounty on his head, calling him Al-Shaitan, the devil. His confirmed kill count continued to rise, eventually reaching over 160, though Kyle himself never focused on the number. "I don't care about records," he told a journalist who asked about his status as the most lethal sniper in U.S. military history. "I care about bringing my guys home." During the Second Battle of Fallujah, Kyle spent 3 days in a damaged building, providing overwatch for Marines clearing houses below. When supplies ran low, he subsisted on a few sips of water and a single protein bar per day. When asked later how he maintained his concentration, he shrugged. "You just do what needs doing," he said. It was during this battle that Kyle made one of his most famous shots, taking out an insurgent with an RPG from 1,920 yards away. The shot required accounting for wind, humidity, the Earth's rotation, and bullet drop. To most snipers, it would have been nearly impossible. To Kyle, it was necessary. "I wasn't thinking about how hard the shot was," he later explained. "I was thinking about the 20 Marines that RPG would have hit." What the movies don't show is how Kyle struggled with the disconnect between combat and home. During a 2-week leave, he found himself standing in a grocery store, paralyzed by the simple choice between dozens of cereal brands when days before he'd been making life-or-death decisions. "Sir, do you need help finding something?" a clerk asked. Kyle looked at her, this normal person in this normal world, and couldn't find words to explain that he needed help finding himself. Kyle's fourth deployment took him to Ramadi during some of the heaviest fighting of the war. It was here that he faced his most challenging moments, both professionally and personally. During an intense firefight, Kyle watched through his scope as a fellow SEAL was hit. Breaking protocol, he left his sniper position to join the ground forces, fighting house to house to reach his wounded teammate. When they finally reached him, Kyle carried the man over his shoulder for 3 blocks under heavy fire. The SEAL survived, but Kyle was haunted by a simple question. Could he have prevented the injury if he'd stayed in position? The question had no answer, but it weighed on him nonetheless. It was also during this deployment that Kyle received word his father was ill. Thousands of miles from home, he could do nothing but continue his mission and pray. When his father recovered, Kyle wrote in his journal, "God gave me another chance to tell him I love him. I won't waste it." The cumulative stress of 4 deployments began to show. Kyle developed migraines so severe they occasionally affected his vision. He refused to report them, fearing he would be pulled from duty and leave his unit without their overwatch. "My headache isn't more important than their lives," he told the one medic who knew about his condition. What few people understood was that for Kyle, being a sniper wasn't about taking lives, it was about saving them. Each confirmed kill represented American soldiers who returned home to their families. This perspective helped him carry the weight, but the burden grew heavier with time. When Kyle finally returned home for good in 2009, the transition to civilian life proved more difficult than any military challenge he'd faced. The hypervigilance that kept him alive in combat made normal life exhausting. He found himself scanning rooftops for snipers while pushing his children on swings, startling at car backfires and shopping mall parking lots. The hardest part, he confided to a fellow veteran, is turning it off. Over there, that alertness keeps you breathing. Here, it keeps you from living. Taya noticed the changes in her husband. The 1,000-yard stare that would come over him mid-conversation, the way he positioned himself with his back to walls and restaurants, the nightmares that left him gasping in the darkness. "Sometimes I feel like you brought the war home with you," she told him one night. "Sometimes I feel like I never left," he answered. Kyle found that helping other veterans gave him purpose. He co-founded Fitco Cares, a nonprofit organization that provided exercise equipment to wounded veterans. He began taking veterans with PTSD to shooting ranges, finding that the structured environment and focus required for marksmanship provided them therapeutic relief. Healing happens different for everyone, he explained to a skeptical psychologist. Some need to talk it out. Some need to sweat it out. Some need to shoot it out in a controlled, positive way. Slowly, Kyle began to find his footing in civilian life. He coached his son's t-ball team, attended his daughter's dance recitals, and worked on rebuilding the easy relationship he once had with Taya. There were setbacks, nights when the memories were too loud, days when the adjustment seemed impossible, but there was also progress. I'm not the same man who left, he told Taya on their anniversary, but I'm trying to be someone worth coming home to. On February 2nd, 2013, Kyle took a troubled veteran, Eddie Ray Routh, to a shooting range as part of his ongoing efforts to help those struggling with PTSD. It was an act of kindness that reflected Kyle's commitment to his fellow veterans. No one could have predicted that Routh, suffering from severe mental illness, would turn his weapon on Kyle and his friend Chad Littlefield, killing them both. The news of Kyle's death sent shockwaves through the military community and beyond. The man who had survived 4 tours in the most dangerous places in Iraq had been killed at home, trying to help another soldier heal. At his memorial service, attended by thousands, fellow SEALs placed their tridents on his casket, a tradition honoring a fallen brother. The procession from Austin to his final resting place in the Texas State Cemetery stretched for miles, with people lining the highways holding American flags. In eulogizing his friend, a fellow SEAL said, "Chris Kyle was a warrior, a patriot, and a guardian angel to those who served alongside him. But more than that, he was a husband who adored his wife, a father who lived for his children, and a friend who would give you his last dollar or the shirt off his back." Chris Kyle's story is often reduced to numbers, his confirmed kills, his medals, his deployments. But those who knew him speak of a different legacy, of a man who struggled with the weight of war, but never let it crush his humanity, of a soldier who excelled at taking lives, but cared more about saving them, of a husband and father who fought as hard for his family as he did for his country. In the years since his death, thousands of veterans have received help through foundations established in his name. His wife Taya continues his work, ensuring that his death, like his life, serves a purpose greater than himself. Perhaps the true measure of Kyle's impact lies not in battlefield statistics, but in the words of a Marine whose life he saved in Fallujah. At Kyle's memorial, the man said simply, "My daughter exists because of Chris Kyle. Every time she smiles, that's Chris's legacy." For all the complexity of his story, the heroism and the hardship, the legend and the man, perhaps this is the clearest truth. Chris Kyle lived and died in service to others. As we reflect on his story, we're reminded that true heroism isn't about being fearless or perfect. It's about facing your fears, acknowledging your flaws, and choosing to serve something greater than yourself anyway. If this deeper look at the man behind the legend has resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. We're dedicated to telling the full stories of American heroes, not just their moments of triumph, but their struggles, their doubts, and the quiet courage it takes to keep going when no one is watching. Chris Kyle's story doesn't end with his death. It continues in the lives he saved, the family he loved, and the example he set of what it means to live with purpose and die with honor. In a world that often feels divided, perhaps we can all find common ground in respecting such sacrifice and commitment. As Kyle himself might say, in his straightforward Texas way, it ain't about the recognition. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And in that simple philosophy lies a wisdom we could all use more of today. What the movies rarely capture is the duality that defined Chris Kyle. To his enemies, he was death from above, a shadow to be feared. To his teammates, he was an unwavering guardian. But in the quiet moments between missions, he was simply Chris, a man who kept pictures of his children taped inside his helmet, who wrote love letters to Taya on whatever scraps of paper he could find. The hardest part isn't pulling the trigger, he once confided to his spotter during a 16-hour Overwatch mission. It's missing first steps and birthdays and being a stranger to your own kids when you come home. During his 3rd deployment, Kyle missed the birth of his son, While his wife labored in a Texas hospital, he was perched on a rooftop in Ramadi, providing cover for Marines clearing a neighborhood of insurgents. When he finally got to his satellite phone 3 days later, Taya described their newborn in detail, his tiny fingers, his cry, the cowlick in his hair, just like his father's. That night, Kyle added a ritual to his pre-mission routine. Along with checking his weapon and saying the names of the men he protected, he would whisper his children's names and add, "Daddy's coming home." It was both a promise and a prayer. The complexity of Kyle's character showed in unexpected moments. During a rare lull in combat operations, he organized a collection among his unit to buy school supplies for Iraqi children in their area of operation. When questioned about this seeming contradiction, the deadly sniper who wanted to help local children, Kyle shrugged. "Kids are kids," he said. "They didn't ask for any of this." This same man, who could show such compassion, was unflinching when it came to his duty. When a new sniper joined his team and hesitated during his first engagement, Kyle pulled him aside afterward. "You need to understand something," he told the young SEAL. "Every insurgent you hesitate to take out might be the one who kills one of our guys. Can you live with that?" The question wasn't meant to be cruel. It was the reality of their responsibility. By the next mission, the new sniper had internalized the lesson. Years later, at Kyle's funeral, this same man would say, "He taught me how to be lethal without losing my humanity." While Kyle's physical injuries were minimal compared to many who served, a knee injury from a fall, shrapnel wounds from a near miss, the invisible wounds of combat accumulated with each deployment. He rarely spoke about these aspects of war, considering them a burden he shouldn't share with those who hadn't been there. During his third tour, Kyle's unit lost 3 men in a single week. As a senior sniper, he questioned every decision he'd made. Could better overwatch have prevented their deaths? Should he have spotted the danger sooner? The questions had no answers, but they followed him like shadows. After particularly difficult missions, Kyle would find a private moment to decompress. Sometimes this meant sitting alone, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. Other times, he would read dog-eared letters from home until the shaking in his hands subsided. His teammates respected these moments, understanding the pressure of his position. "Kyle carries more than his pack," his platoon leader noted in a performance review. "He carries the safety of every man in this unit on his shoulders, and he does it without complaint." What few people knew was that Kyle suffered from crushing migraines that sometimes affected his vision, a potentially catastrophic condition for a sniper. He kept this secret from all but his closest teammates, fearing he would be pulled from duty. "I'd rather deal with the pain than leave my guys without cover," he told the medic who supplied him with medication under the table. This stubborn sense of duty extended to all aspects of his service. During his 4th deployment, Kyle was offered a position training new snipers, a safer assignment that would have taken him away from direct combat. He declined. "I've got experience the new guys don't," he explained to his commanding officer. "If I'm training, who's watching over them in the field?" The dichotomy between Kyle the warrior and Kyle the man was most evident during his infrequent calls home. He would transition from discussing enemy movements with his team to asking Taya about their daughter's dance recital in the span of minutes, compartmentalizing his 2 worlds out of necessity. This compartmentalization became harder to maintain with each deployment. During his final tour, Kyle found himself staring at a family photo during a rare moment of downtime. A teammate noticed his expression and asked if everything was okay. "I'm starting to forget what they smell like," Kyle admitted. "My own kids, and I can't remember exactly how they smell after a bath or when they wake up in the morning." It was perhaps the most vulnerable moment anyone had witnessed from the legendary sniper. The next day, he was back on Overwatch, steady and focused as ever, but something had shifted. He began talking more openly with his team about life after deployment, about the importance of transitioning well for the sake of their families. "We owe it to them to come all the way home," he told a young SEAL who was on his first deployment. "Not just our bodies, but our heads too." This growing awareness of the toll of combat didn't diminish Kyle's effectiveness. If anything, it clarified his purpose. He wasn't fighting for abstract concepts like freedom or democracy, though he believed in both. He was fighting for the tangible, for his children to grow up safe, for his teammates to return to their families, for the next generation to not face the same threats. During the Second Battle of Fallujah, Kyle spent 72 hours in a sniper hide without relief, providing overwatch for Marines clearing houses below. When he finally returned to base, dehydrated and exhausted, a commanding officer commended his extraordinary endurance. "Nothing extraordinary about it, sir," Kyle replied. "Those Marines needed eyes up high. I had the position." This matter-of-fact approach to exceptional service characterized Kyle throughout his career. He viewed himself not as a hero, but as a craftsman who had mastered a difficult but necessary trade. The Kyle family learned to dread what they called the 2-week mark, that point in Chris's home leave when the joy of reunion had faded, but the reality of separation loomed. It was during these times that the strain between his two worlds became most apparent. During one such period, Taya found him sitting alone in their backyard at 3 a.m., cleaning his hunting rifle with the same meticulous care he showed his military weapons. "Can't sleep?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the night chill. "Keep hearing things," he admitted. "Keeps me up." "What kind of things?" Kyle was silent for a long moment before answering. "The kind of things you shouldn't have to hear about." This protective instinct, shielding his family from the realities of his combat experience, created a wall between them that grew higher with each deployment. Taya, for her part, tried to bridge the gap by learning about military operations, by asking questions about the parts of his job he could discuss, by creating space for him to decompress without pressure. Their marriage survived when many military relationships crumbled, but it required constant work from both of them. After his third deployment, they sought counseling, a step that Kyle initially resisted, viewing it as an admission of weakness. "I can handle firefights and insurgents," he told a therapist in their first session. "Why can't I handle coming home to my own family?" The therapist, a Vietnam veteran himself, replied simply, "Because we're trained for war. Nobody trains us for coming back." This insight marked a turning point for Kyle. He began to approach the challenges of reintegration with the same determination he brought to military operations, as problems to be solved rather than failures to be ashamed of. When his children were hesitant around him after a long absence, he created special daddy days where each child got one-on-one time doing activities they chose. When crowds at shopping malls triggered his hypervigilance, he worked with Taya to develop strategies, like shopping during off hours or positioning himself with his back to a wall. He approached civilian life like a mission, Taya later recalled. He studied it, planned for it, and executed with determination. That's who Chris was. He didn't know how to give less than everything. After leaving active duty in 2009, Kyle faced the challenge that awaits all warriors: finding purpose in peacetime. For a man who had defined himself by his ability to protect others in the most extreme circumstances, civilian life initially seemed mundane and purposeless. "I went from making life-or-death decisions to deciding what to watch on TV," he told a fellow veteran. The adjustment is difficult. Kyle tried various paths, working for a tactical training company, writing his autobiography, American Sniper, making appearances to promote the book. But he found his true post-military calling in helping other veterans struggling with the transition he himself had found so challenging. He co-founded Fitco Cares, now the Chris Kyle Frog Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided exercise equipment to wounded veterans. The foundation was based on Kyle's belief that physical activity was crucial for mental health, something he had discovered in his own recovery process. When your body's moving, your mind can't circle the same dark thoughts, he explained to a group of veterans at the program's launch. "At least, that's how it works for me." Beyond the foundation, Kyle began working one-on-one with veterans suffering from PTSD. His approach was unconventional. He would take them hunting, fishing, or to shooting ranges, creating environments where they could talk man-to-man without the clinical atmosphere of traditional therapy. "Some guys won't open up sitting in an office," he explained to a VA psychologist who questioned his methods. "But put a fishing rod in their hands or get them focusing on marksmanship, and suddenly they can talk about stuff they've never told anyone." Kyle's effectiveness in this role came from his authenticity. He never pretended to have all the answers or to have perfectly conquered his own demons. Instead, he offered fellow veterans something perhaps more valuable: the understanding that came from shared experience and the hope that recovery, while not always linear, was possible. During this period, Kyle received hundreds of messages from veterans seeking help. He tried to respond to each one personally, often meeting them for coffee or a trip to the range. His wife worried about the toll this took on him, the weight of carrying not only his own experiences but absorbing those of others. "You can't save everyone, Chris," she told him after he spent a night talking a fellow SEAL through a particularly dark moment. "Maybe not," he agreed, "but I could try to save this one, and that one, and the next one." It was this commitment to serving his fellow veterans that led Kyle to Rough Creek Lodge on February 2nd, 2013. Eddie Ray Routh, a Marine veteran reportedly suffering from PTSD and other mental health issues, had been brought to Kyle's attention by the veteran's mother, who was desperate for help for her son. Despite having misgivings, something he expressed to Chad Littlefield as they drove to meet Routh, Kyle was determined to try. It was consistent with everything he had been in life. A man who moved toward danger rather than away from it, who felt a responsibility to help those in need, who believed in second chances and healing. No one could have predicted that this act of kindness would lead to his death. Routh, suffering from severe paranoia and delusions, shot and killed both Kyle and Littlefield at the shooting range. News of Kyle's death spread rapidly through military and civilian communities alike. For many Americans, Kyle had become a symbol of the post-9/11 warrior, someone who had served with distinction in the most difficult circumstances and then dedicated himself to helping others. His funeral procession from Austin to the Texas State Cemetery stretched for miles, with thousands of people lining the highways holding American flags. Veterans' motorcycle groups provided escorts, and law enforcement from multiple jurisdictions coordinated to manage the unprecedented turnout. At Cowboys Stadium, where a public memorial service was held, more than 7,000 people gathered to honor Kyle. Fellow SEALs, political figures, and ordinary citizens whose lives he had touched came together in a rare moment of national unity. In eulogizing his friend, a fellow SEAL said, "Chris Kyle was a warrior by necessity, not by nature. His true character showed not in how many enemies he defeated, but in how many friends he supported, how many lives he saved, and how much love he gave to his family." Taya Kyle, showing the same strength that had sustained her through years of deployments and reunions, spoke directly to her husband. "God knew it would take the toughest and most tender-hearted man on earth to get a hard-headed, cynical, hard-loving woman like me to see what God needed me to see, and he chose you for the job." In the days following Kyle's death, stories emerged from veterans across the country who had been helped by him, often quietly, without publicity or recognition. One former Marine described how Kyle had spent 3 days helping him build a wheelchair ramp for his home when contractors quoted prohibitive prices. Another recounted how Kyle had paid for his PTSD treatment when insurance wouldn't cover it, asking only that he pay it forward when he was able. These stories painted a picture of Kyle that went beyond the legend of his military service. A man whose commitment to service didn't end when he took off the uniform, whose definition of protecting others expanded to include healing invisible wounds. In the years since his death, Kyle's legacy has become part of larger national conversations about war, veterans' care, heroism, and the complex realities faced by those who serve in combat. His autobiography, American Sniper, and the subsequent film directed by Clint Eastwood brought his story to millions, though both the book and movie necessarily simplified a complex man and his experiences. Some have questioned aspects of Kyle's account, particularly claims that couldn't be verified about incidents outside his military service. Others have debated the ethics of celebrating a sniper's lethal efficiency, however necessary it may have been in the context of war. These discussions reflect the complicated nature of modern warfare and its aftermath, the blurred lines between heroism and trauma, between necessary violence and its psychological cost, between patriotism and the reality of what we ask our military members to do in our name. Perhaps the most meaningful aspect of Kyle's legacy lies not in these debates, but in the concrete improvements to veteran services that have come in the wake of his death. The Chris Kyle Frog Foundation continues his work, providing meaningful experiences that enrich family relationships for service members and first responders. Additionally, his death highlighted gaps in mental health services for veterans, leading to renewed focus on improving access to care and developing more effective treatments for PTSD and related conditions. For the men and women who serve alongside him, Kyle's legacy is deeply personal. Many credit him not only with saving their lives in combat, but with showing them how to live with purpose after returning home. Chris taught me that being a warrior isn't just about what you do in battle, one former teammate said at a Foundation event. It's about how you carry yourself every day, how you treat others, how you face challenges. He was a warrior in the truest sense, not because of his skill with a rifle, but because of his heart. In the years since his death, the legend of Chris Kyle has sometimes overshadowed the man himself. The record-breaking sniper, the larger-than-life Texas figure, the American hero. These aspects of his story, while true, don't capture the full measure of who he was. Those who knew him best speak of his mischievous sense of humor, his tendency to downplay his own accomplishments while celebrating others, his struggle to reconcile the different parts of himself. Warrior and family man, protector and healer, legend and ordinary person trying to find his way. They tell stories about how he would spend hours helping neighborhood kids fix their bikes, how he volunteered at his children's school without mentioning his military background, how he would anonymously pay for veterans' meals at restaurants. The real Chris wasn't the one in the headlines, a childhood friend said at his memorial. He was the guy who would drive all night to help you move, who remembered your kids' birthdays, who never let fame change how he treated people. Perhaps this is the most important part of Kyle's legacy. Not the number of confirmed kills or the medals on his chest, but the example he set of serving others in both extraordinary and ordinary ways. In a culture that often celebrates individual achievement above all else, Kyle demonstrated that true strength lies in what we do for others, not what we accomplish for ourselves. As Taya Kyle wrote in her own memoir, American Wife, Chris's story has never been about the number of people he shot. It's about the number of people he saved. Today, the mission Chris Kyle began continues through the work of his foundation, through the veterans he mentored who now mentor others, through his family's ongoing advocacy for military families, and through the countless individuals inspired by his example to serve in whatever capacity they can. His children, now growing up without their father, carry forward his legacy in their own ways. His son has his quiet determination, his daughter his compassionate heart. Both have his resilience, a quality Taya has nurtured in them through both good times and unimaginable grief.